This morning. Welcome to everyone who is here with us in person for the first time here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Roanoke. And we welcome those who are joining us on YouTube. For those on YouTube, if you would like to share during the Lifelines part of the service, please put your comments in that part of the service. I came this morning prepared to tell you that our minister is with us, and we're so happy to see him. This morning's service is how urban renewal decimated businesses and neighborhoods in Roanoke. Summer camp director at his favorite place ever, Apple Ridge Farm. He previously worked for Roanoke City Public Schools at Garden City Elementary. He also was a youth development coordinator at the Boys and Girls Club. Jordan takes pride in being involved in his point of diversity, Black Millennials of Roanoke, or BMOR, One Valley, and Children Grow. He takes pride in taking care of his family. He's the middle child of three to the late Carlton Bell, who was a longtime educator here in Roanoke, and his beloved mother, Catherine Bell. Jordan's passions are working with young people and recording history. His project, with the help of his daughter, Soraya, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's called Gainsborough Revisited. It's a documentary and nonprofit on the history of the Gainsborough community and urban renewal in the Roanoke Valley. Over the years, he has interviewed Black pioneers in the Roanoke Valley, asking them to tell their stories, especially of how urban renewal impacted the Black community. And he periodically conducts tours of the Gainsborough neighborhood to help people put what he has gathered, the information he's gathered, into context. So if you're interested in one of the tours, you might want to touch base with him after the service. Daily, Jordan works with hundreds of children doing what he loves to do and impacting their lives by teaching them who they are and the power they have within themselves. As you're comfortable, please join me in speaking the words of welcome and the covenant. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you express your identity, what your situation in life, whatever your experience of the holy, as you come seeking love, your presence here is a gift. Whether you are filled with sadness, overflowing with joy, needing to be alone with yourself, or eager to engage with others, all who welcome all are welcome here. And the covenant, we commit to supporting each other with respect and direct communication as we work in community to explore spiritual growth and to be a force for good in the world.
Good morning, everyone. I call him Mr. Bestfitch, but he gets me all the time, so I'm going to call him Bill. I want to thank Bill for inviting me here this morning and introducing me and everyone at this beautiful and welcoming and loving church. My name is Jordan Bell, live in the Gainesboro area, and just a passionate person for history and figuring out what we can do to create a better future for our entire city. So I wanted to start off by reading something from the book Root Shock by Dr. Mindy Thompson Fully Love. And it says, Root Shock, How Tearing Up City Neighborhoods Hurts America and What We Can Do About It. So before my presentation, I wanted to kind of give you a definition of what Dr. Fully Love describes as root shock. And if you have the book, it is on page 11. And she defines root shock is the traumatic stress reaction to the destruction of all or part of one's emotional ecosystem. It has important parallels to the psychological shock experienced by a person who, as a result of injury, suddenly loses massive amounts of fluids. Such a blow threatens the whole body's ability to function. The nervous system attempts to compensate for the imbalance by cutting off circulation to the arms and legs. Suddenly, the hands and feet will seem cold and damp, the face pale and the brow sweaty. This is an emergency state that can preserve the brain, the heart, and the other essential organs for only a brief period of time. If the fluids are not restored, the person will die. Shock is the fight for survival after a life-threatening blow to the body's internal balance. Thank you.
We hallow this time together by lighting the lamp of our heritage.
Good morning. I'm Jessie McEwen, the Director of Lifespan Faith Development here, and I'd like to invite up all children. If anybody else wants to move closer, come on down. There's a seat for you. If you have balloons, please leave those balloons where they are before you come down here. So I have something to tell you. I have here a teacup and saucer. My friend Morgan and I love to have tea together. And I was at Morgan's house not that long ago, and I did not ask her permission. I just grabbed a teacup out of the cabinet, made myself some tea, sat down, and then I dropped the teacup and saucer on the ground. And it broke into so many pieces. But I felt like it was okay because we'd used this tea set a lot of times. Morgan won't mind. And I swept it all up and put it in a bag. And about that time, Morgan came home. Oh, Morgan wasn't there. About that, I just went over to visit her dog. I was just at her house. No, I have a key. We're friends. I take care of her dog sometimes. So I went. I had it all swept up into a bag, and she got home and she said, "Hey, what's in the bag?" And I said, "It's a teacup that I broke." And she said, "That's my favorite teacup. That was my grandma's teacup." And I felt really bad because her grandma gave her this teacup. So I'd broken her teacup and I didn't know what to do. So I did what a lot of people would do, and I tried to put it back together. First, I tried tape, and that didn't work so well. You can see right here, I couldn't even find all the pieces. There's holes in this teacup. I tried this really cool like plastic stuff called Sugru, and it did an okay job, but then I found out that it's not safe for people to eat off of. And so I made it less safe than it was, and then I tried super glue, and the super glue worked really well. Sandy, look right there. Do you see that crack? Can you barely see it, right? No, Sandy can see it. It's like a scar. It's like a scar. So, and I was doing all of this, and I was so ashamed. I didn't want to talk to Morgan about it. I just kind of went home and started working on it. And finally, I had to show this to Morgan. And I had to say, I can't fix it. I can't fix it. This is your grandma's teacup, and I can't fix it. This is your favorite thing in the world, and I can't fix it. Morgan was sad. Morgan was mad. How would you feel if I'd broken your favorite thing in the world? Right, coming into your house uninvited. There's a lot of things that I did that I shouldn't have done, right? And I mean, we laugh because it's so absurd that I did this. But I thought I was just going to go and use Morgan's good teacup and use Morgan's good tea. And instead, I made a big problem because I acted like it belonged to me. So finally, I went to Morgan and I said, Morgan, what can we do? And Morgan said, there's no fixing this. There's no fixing this. This cannot be fixed. But why don't we take a class in ceramics? You can learn how to make me a new one. And I said, but it's not going to be as good. And she said, but if we work together and you listen to me about what I want and what I need out of a teacup, we'll make something new. And if we think about it, lots of times this is how we treat people. And our friend Jordan, who we just met, is going to have a conversation about things like this, about when we go and take things that don't belong to us, when we break things that don't belong to us. And that working together and listening to Morgan. I'm not the important person in this story. Morgan is. So if I listen to Morgan, maybe I can make her a better teacup. Now, when I'm done with that class, would you guys like to see that teacup? I've got a lot of learning to do. I'll try not to drop it again. But I've got a lot of learning to do, but maybe I can make a new teacup. We're going to go upstairs, and we're going to learn some stuff about Roanoke while these folks are learning some stuff about Roanoke, too. Are you ready? Let's do it.
A historian can't go too far without books, right? Oh, at you. Oh, okay. Say what? Sounds like a plan to me. Well, good morning again. Gainesboro is a very important community, not only to the city of Roanoke and not only to the state of Virginia, but to the entire world. Gainesboro consists of famous streets such as Wells Avenue, Gilmer, Patton Avenue, and of course, many of you may have heard of the name Henry Street. When I speak about Gainesboro, I'm speaking about an area of Northwest Roanoke, but also Northeast Roanoke. where the Berglund Center and the post office is, and Magic City Ford and Williamson Road and those areas like that, because all of this has impacted each of those communities. And so throughout this presentation, you'll learn about areas that many of you have been to, many of you have driven through, many of you have maybe been to some of the events in Gainesboro and just maybe not have known what this community once was and what this community meant to this city, the state, and the entire world. So as you can see here, it's entitled Gainesboro, the Mother of Roanoke, Virginia. And it's entitled that because Gainesboro was the first community in what we now know as Roanoke. Before it was called Old Lick and Big Lick, and before it was called Roanoke, the community in the neighborhood was just called Gainesboro. And so many of the buildings and the institutions that you see in this picture here, St. Andrew's Catholic Church, my generation of folks and younger than me refer to this as Disneyland. You see the historic Gainesboro sign. The yellow building at the bottom is the Clater Memorial Clinic. The building right in front of it is the Lawson Building. Reuben Lawson's name has been in the news lately. The Poff, they're fighting to see if they can get the Poff Building named in his honor. He was an attorney in Gainesboro. And then you see Our Lady of the Valley Nursing Home, and then, of course, the historic Gainesboro Library. Now you can. So Gainesboro was settled around in the 1830s by William Rowland and was financed by a gentleman by the name of Major Kemp Gaines. That is where the name of Gainesboro actually originates. William Rowland actually named this area in honor of his friend and the person who paid for the settlement, Major Kemp Gaines. It was an all-white settlement in the early 19th century, and it started to turn into an African-American community in the early 20th century due to the booming railroad. As I said, it consists of famous streets such as Gilmer, Patton, Wells Avenue, Henry Street, where the Martin Luther King statue is. That is Gainesboro as well. There used to be the Henry Street and a driving bridge. But it was a community where African-American doctors, lawyers, teachers, railroad workers, hotel workers, all lived in the same community. No matter your job, no matter your title, no matter the amount of money that you made, you all lived in the same community right next door to one another. And so that is the importance of Gainesboro. It's referred to by many as the Black Wall Street of Southwest Virginia. It had over 200 businesses, hospitals, movie theaters, cab companies, record stores, hotels. But I won't tell you all that now. You'll see it in the presentation, all right? So to me, what really makes Gainesboro stand out versus other African-American communities during that time is the medical story of Gainesboro. The first gentleman you see pictured is Dr. Isaac D. Burrow. He was born in Amelia County, Virginia, right outside of Richmond in 1865. He attended local schools there for African-Americans, and then eventually he went to Leonard Medical School at Shaw University in North Carolina. He received his MD degree in the late 1880s, and he moved here to Roanoke, Virginia, right after receiving his MD degree. As I said earlier, it was a very busy city. It was growing due to the railroad, and this was a very important place for African Americans to come to receive jobs and get jobs on the railroad. So Dr. Burrow came here and he started a pharmacy in 1893 called Burrow Pharmacy on Gainesboro Road in the Davis Hall. And where the current Gainesboro Library is, you have Gainesboro Road that separates, there's a set of steps across the street from the library, and that is Gainesboro Road. Directly next to those steps was a place called Davis Hall, and that is where Dr. Burrow started his pharmacy in 1893. It was the first Black pharmacy in Southwest Virginia, and according to the Richmond Planet, it was the best, well-kept, and well-resourced African-American pharmacy in the state of Virginia. Started right here in Roanoke. So Dr. Burrow came here in the 1890s, and he recruited many of the African-American doctors that you see here. So Dr. James Roberts is directly below him. Dr. Downing right here in the middle. At the top is Dr. Shadrach Willman. Below him is Dr. John B. Claytor Jr. And then below Dr. Claytor is Dr. Jerry S. Cooper. All of these individuals came here to Roanoke at the request of Dr. Burrow. In the early 1900s, there was no African-American hospital in this area. So Dr. Burrow and these doctors here, with the help of Miss Lucy Addison, started the process and planning of an African-American hospital for their patients. In 1914, Dr. Burrow became ill with a gallstone issue. He was refused surgery at all the major hospitals in the state of Virginia. He had to travel over 200 miles to Freedman's Hospital on the campus of Howard University in Washington, D.C. Dr. Roberts and Mrs. Burrow traveled with him on the back of a train, and Dr. Burrow laid on a cot. He received surgery at Freedman's Hospital at Howard University, unfortunately passing away after that surgery. The following year in 1915, March of 1915, Dr. Roberts, Dr. Downing, Dr. Willman, Dr. Claytor, Dr. Cooper, the wife, Margaret, the wife of Dr. Burrow, Margaret Burrow, and Miss Lucy Addison started Burrow Memorial Hospital at 311 Henry Street. If you're familiar with the Gainesboro area, if you're familiar with First Baptist Church, Gainesboro on Wells Avenue, the parking lot of that church is where this hospital sat. It was a 10-bed, it was a shack, a home, a former home. Dr. Roberts owned the home, and it was 10 beds, and it was started at 311 Henry Street in March of 1915. 6 years after that, the city of Roanoke partnered with Burrow Hospital, and they moved to the Allegheny Boys Institute on McDowell Avenue in 1921. Here, they started a nursing program that for the next 50 years graduated 99% of their nursing classes. They partnered with high schools such as Lucy Addison and William Fleming, and they graduated 99% of all of their nursing classes. The nursing instructors were folks such as Miriam Smith and Kim Claytor, who was the wife of Dr. Walter Claytor, if that name sounds familiar. But if you were born from 1915 up into the 1970s in this area and you were African American, more than likely you were born in the top hospital or the hospital here. This building here is the building that many of us know today. If you ever were to go over to McDowell Avenue, and the address is 611 McDowell Avenue Northwest, this building still stands and is now Blue Ridge. And the way that the building is shaped, it's a unique shape to it, because as they were building the last location, they were still operating out of the second location. So the Allegheny Boys Institute building actually sat in front of what you see here there today. And they built that building around the Allegheny Boys Institute because they couldn't stop the hospital operations. So instead of stopping the hospital operations, they just built around the Allegheny Boys Institute. And when that building was finished in the 1950s, they tore down the Allegheny Boys Institute. Just a phenomenal story, a phenomenal hospital. Just all of what Gainesboro it was and is comes from this story here. All of what Gainesboro was and is comes from the tremendous fight to start Burrow Memorial Hospital. It was closed in the 1970s when integration had hit this community. It kind of decimated the businesses and also the hospital. And it was closed in the 1970s and is now still in operation as Blue Ridge Healthcare. And there is a historical marker in front of the hospital that details the story of Burr Memorial Hospital. Now, again, this was the first African-American hospital in Southwest Virginia. So all of Southwest Virginia, if you were African-American and you could afford to drive to Roanoke, you would come to Burr Memorial Hospital. I know this photo looks familiar to many of you. This is Miss Lucy Addison. She was born in 1861. She moved here to Roanoke in the late 1880s, and she came here with the determination to start a secondary educational school for African Americans. Before 1916, if you were African American in Roanoke, you had a choice. You could go to the Christiansburg Institute in Christiansburg, but many folks did not attend there. So if you did not attend to the Christiansburg Institute, you had to leave Virginia completely to attend school. You went to places like North Carolina, Washington, D.C., the Claytor family, the famous Claytor family, they had family in Tennessee, so they went to Tennessee to finish high school before 1916. Miss Lucy Addison worked at schools such as Gainsborough Elementary School, but her tremendous work, she started Harrison High School in 1916, which is this building right in the middle. The Harrison Museum, which is in the center in the square, originated in this building here. And it was started in 1916, and the first graduating class of Harrison High School was in 1923, 1924. Her students, one of her students was Mr. Oliver Hill, as a young boy at Gainsborough Elementary School. She was the principal of Mr. Oliver Hill. She started Harrison High School, first graduating class 1923, 1924. Then, when she retired in 1927 after working 40 years in the educational field, the city of Roanoke started Lucy Addison High School, which is now the current school administration building. That was started in 1927. And if I remember correctly, that is the first building in the city of Roanoke to be named after a private citizen, man or woman, white or black. It was named after Miss Lucy Addison. She actually came back to the opening ceremony of this high school named in her honor, and the first graduating class was in 1928. And the building that many of you now know today as Lucy Addison, they moved the high school to this location in the early 1950s, and the last graduating class of Lucy Addison High School was in 1973. By that time, it was an integrated high school. Many folks who eventually would go to Patrick Henry or William Fleming actually attended Lucy Addison High School. It was a very huge trade school. And again, the last graduating class was in 1973. So just another tremendous story, tremendous history of Miss Lucy Addison. And then the medical story, the educational story really stands out. But then the civil rights story of Gainsborough is just a tremendous feat in itself. Here you have pictured at the top, Mr. Edward Dudley. He was born in South Boston, Virginia in 1911. He moved here as a young boy with his father and his mother. His father, Edward Dudley, was the first black dentist here in Roanoke. They lived on Gilmer Avenue in Northwest Roanoke. He attended Harrison Elementary School and graduated from Lucy Addison High School in 1928. He went to law school. He wanted to be like his father and become a dentist. But according to Edward Dudley's son, Edward Dudley said being a dentist was kind of boring. So he went to law school and he received his law degree from Howard University. But he was also a school teacher. So he taught at Harrison School. He was also a bus driver. So he drove the bus for Harrison School. He received his law degree from Howard University. He worked with folks such as Thurgood Marshall. And when Harry Truman was attempting to get reelected, Harry Truman and Thurgood, at the request of Thurgood Marshall, created the first Black ambassador in the country. And that title was given to Mr. Edward Dudley. And he grew up right here in Roanoke, Virginia on Gilmer Avenue. And he became the first Black ambassador in the country under the Harry Truman administration. Directly below him was his childhood friend, Mr. Oliver Hill. They lived directly next door to each other. There's a beautiful picture at the Gainsborough Library of Edward Dudley and Oliver Hill as little boys sitting on the porch of Oliver Hill's childhood home. Oliver Hill, like Edward Dudley, moved here as a young boy with his stepfather and his mother. His stepfather owned a business on Henry Street. They moved into 401 Gilmer Avenue. Both of their childhood homes still stands. And they moved in with the Pentecost family. Bradford Pentecost was a chef on the railroad. And when they moved in with the Pentecost family, Edward Dudley's stepfather, Oliver Hill's stepfather always went to take care of the business. His mother stayed home and took care of the children. And Oliver Hill, as I said, attended school here as a young boy. Miss Lucy Addison was his teacher and principal. Oliver Hill left Roanoke, attended high school. He received his law degree from Howard University. His law professor was Charles Hamilton Houston. After receiving his law degree, he came back to Roanoke from 1934 to 1936. He had a law office on Center Avenue in the Brooks Building, and he fought on a case in Farmville, Virginia. And in Farmville, Virginia, instead of desegregating the schools, they just completely shut the school system down. And so when they shut the school system down, word of that got to Thurgood Marshall, and Oliver Hill was living in Richmond at the time with his law partner, Spotswood Robinson III. The case in Farmville, Virginia, actually became the first case that would become the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education case. So because of Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson's fight in Farmville, Virginia, we got the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education case, which were multiple cases in the South that was comprised of one large case that was, of course, taken to the Supreme Court, argued by Thurgood Marshall and Mr. Oliver Hill. There's actually a picture of Oliver Hill and Thurgood Marshall and a few other attorneys actually in Thurgood Marshall's law office. So Oliver Hill fought in Farmville, Virginia, 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education case. He worked right here in Roanoke from 1934 to 1936. And I think if he would have made a little bit more money, he would have stayed here in Roanoke. But Richmond was more of a hotbed for desegregation cases. And so he moved to Richmond after leaving here in the late 1930s, and he would go on to make history. He passed away in 2007 at the age of 100. There's a historical marker in front of his home now. We were fortunate enough to have his son, Oliver Whitehill Jr. here when the courthouse was named after his father. And also the historical marker was put into the ground as well. Mr. Oliver Whitehill Jr. was here, but unfortunately he passed away a few years ago. He was a professor at Virginia State University. So we have Edward Dudley, Oliver Hill, childhood friends, next door neighbors, would go on to impact the world. Mr. Belford Lawson. Mr. Belford Lawson, he was born in Northeast Roanoke. The name Lawson may sound familiar to you. As I mentioned earlier, Reuben Lawson. Reuben Lawson was actually his first cousin. And Belford Lawson's sister, Sadie V. Lawson, was a longtime educator. She was a principal here in Roanoke City. His brother, Fred Lawson, worked at Harrison High School for many, many years. But Belford Lawson would go on to become an attorney like Edward Dudley and Oliver Hill. The distinct honor that Belford Lawson has is he became the first Black attorney to win a case before the United States Supreme Court. He was born right here in Northeast Roanoke. He attended the University of Michigan. He coached at Jackson State Institute, now Jackson State University. He would become an attorney in Washington, D.C. He started an organization called the New Negro Alliance. And this organization was started to protest white businesses in Washington, D.C. that would not hire African Americans. And so the New Negro Alliance told African Americans, do not shop where they won't hire you. And so those businesses took out an injunction against the New Negro Alliance. Well, Belford Lawson was blown away by this because he basically was arguing that we don't have to shop where we do not want to shop. Well, those businesses kind of got peed off at Belford Lawson, took that to the local court system. That case eventually made it to the Supreme Court of the United States. And Belford Lawson argued that I can basically tell anybody that they don't have to shop where they don't want to shop. The Supreme Court agreed with Belford Lawson in the New Negro Alliance, and he became the first Black attorney to win a case before the United States Supreme Court. And all of these individuals lived right here in Roanoke, Virginia. The bottom photo, Roanoke produced 4 Tuskegee Airmen. All of these Tuskegee Airmen were Lucy Addison High School graduates. From left to right, you have Second Lieutenant Leroy Williams, Second Lieutenant Eugene Williams, Second Lieutenant Ralph Clater, and Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Wilson. All of these individuals were Tuskegee Airmen. All of these individuals graduated from Lucy Addison High School. All of these individuals lived in Gainesboro. Just a tremendous story. And last but certainly not least, Mr. William Bernard Robertson. Unfortunately, Mr. Robertson passed away a few years ago, and he came out with I like to call it an autobiography, Lifting Every Voice, My Journey from Segregated Roanoke to the Corridors of Power, Mr. William Bernard Robertson. Mr. William Bernard Robertson grew up right here in Roanoke, Virginia. He graduated Lucy Addison High School. He went to Bluefield State College in West Virginia. He came back to Roanoke. He became a teacher at Gilmer Elementary School. He became a principal at Hurt Park Elementary School. He worked under Governor Linwood Holton. A tremendous story, tremendous individual. He joined the Virginia Camp JCs, and this camp was a camp for autistic children. And they serviced over 60,000 children over a 40-year period of time. Mr. Robertson worked under 5 United States presidents. He worked under 5 United States presidents. A tremendous individual, the greatest storyteller I've ever met. He lived in Maryland for many years before his passing, but he worked at Gilmer Elementary School. He was a teacher there. He was a principal at Hurt Park Elementary School. He worked under Governor Linwood Holton, and then eventually he would work under 5 United States presidents. And all of these individuals were born and lived right here in Roanoke, Virginia. Now, here comes the fun part. Now, this is what many of you have heard before. Henry Street, AKA the Yard, if you've ever heard that term, the Yard. Henry Street consisted of over 300 businesses from about 1915 up into the 1970s. Things like trade schools, hotels, movie theaters, cab companies, steak shops, record stores, cab companies, grocery stores. Anything you can think of, it was either on Henry Street or around Henry Street. Henry Street started at First Street Bridge, the current Martin Luther King Bridge. So it connected downtown and it stopped at Gilmer Avenue. So it went straight through all the way to Gilmer Avenue. And it was considered the Black Wall Street of Southwest Virginia. This is Dr. Harry T. Penn, and he was a local dentist here. He was also a school board member. His dentist office was on Center Avenue. And this young lady with him is Miss Lena Horn. And Miss Lena Horn and Dr. Harry T. Penn were such good friends and close friends that Miss Lena Horn came to visit him here in Roanoke one day. And this photo was taken, Dr. Harry T. Penn and Miss Lena Horn. Dr. Harry T. Penn was a business owner, school board member. He was a dentist in the city, just a tremendous individual, tremendous individual, and his office was on Center Avenue, right next to Henry Street in Gainesboro. But Dr. Harry T. Penn and Miss Lena Horn here. And then these are a few photos of what Gainesboro used to look like at one point. The Lincoln Theater, this photo at the top, that building still stands. The Hotel Dumas, that building still stands. It's now the Dumas Center. But as I said, as you can see, there were shoe stores, there were 2 hotels, movie theaters, grocery stores, steak shops. The Roanoke Tribune was on Henry Street. Just a tremendous place, a tremendous street, a tremendous area to be during that time. Folks like Fats Domino and Dizzy Gillespie, Little Richard, the Harlem Globetrotters, Ella Fitzgerald, opera singer Miriam Anderson. James Brown brought his tour bus to Henry Street one day. And the most famous picture of Henry Street is Mr. Duke Ellington inside the Hotel Dumas with a cup in his hand and a soda pop being poured. I have never been able to figure out who that young lady is, but that is Mr. Duke Ellington inside the Hotel Dumas. And again, they performed at places like the American Legion Auditorium. And then after their performances, they would come to places like Henry Street and have the best time of their life. But during that time, folks like Fats Domino and Dizzy Gillespie and Duke Ellington and Little Richard, Ella Fitzgerald, all came here to Roanoke, all came to Henry Street. Now, my favorite part of the presentation, my favorite part of the walking tours, and my favorite part of Gainesboro are the people and the buildings and the homes of the individuals who lived in Gainesboro. And so the story that I'm getting ready to tell you is just a tremendous story of a family that literally took over Gainesboro and took over that area. Dr. John B. Claytor Sr. Was one of 13 children, and he married Miss Roberta Woodfin in 1911. They had 8 children. Now, Dr. Claytor was one of 13. He was born in Floyd County, Virginia. He attended Hampton Institute. He, like Dr. Burrow, went to Shaw University, Leonard Medical School. At the request of Dr. Burrow, Dr. Claytor came here to Roanoke in 1907 and opened his practice. He lived with Dr. Burrow for a little while before purchasing a home in 1911 on Gilmer Avenue with his wife. Miss Roberta Woodfin was Presbyterian, and her father and her mother sent her to Roanoke to learn the Presbyterian way. So they sent her to Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church under the leadership of the Downing family. And who was given the responsibility of picking up Miss Woodfin from the railroad? On his horse and buggy, Mr. Dr. Claytor himself. Dr. Claytor had never met her. He wasn't looking to get married. He was a young man. He went down to pick her up from the railroad. And according to their children in this magnificent family book, The Virginia Kaleidoscope, this entire book is about their family. And in this book, and according to their children, Dr. Walter Claytor, he says that Dr. Claytor was love at first sight. And so when he went to pick her up, it was actually a friend that requested that Dr. Claytor, he had opened up his practice. He was beginning to make money. Now it was important that he gets married and start a family. And so in 1911, he got married to Miss Roberta Woodfin. And as I said, they had 8 children, 4 sons and 4 daughters. As I said, Dr. Claytor was one of the founding members of Burrow Memorial Hospital. Mrs. Claytor was really good friends with folks such as Lucy Addison and Margaret Burrow. And then about 10 years after being married, now they only had 2 children at this time. They built a 23-room mansion, which is this picture here. Now, again, they only had 2 children at the time. And in this book, Virginia Kaleidoscope, I'm going to read a brief part about what the home looked like. So 3 of their daughters wrote this book. And they said, on July 1st, 1920, the They called Dr. Claytor Papa. Papa had invested $11,000 in real estate a couple blocks away, encompassing an irregularly shaped city block bounded by North Jefferson Street on the east, Patton Avenue on the north, and Gainsborough Road on the west, and Gilmer Avenue on the south. Now imagine your home consisting of 4 streets. He also owned the Ideal Pharmacy at the end of this block. So Dr. Claytor owned a pharmacy. He was a doctor at Borough Hospital. He built the mansion. And then about a year later, he built a service station on the Gilmer Avenue side. And then it goes to say, Dad, this was their grandfather, brought his horse Jack from Bristol, and Mrs. Claytor's father, Dad, actually built the home to haul materials the few blocks from the railroad station to the building site. By this time, John was driving a horseless carriage, one of the first blacks in Roanoke to have a car. The distinction of being the first colored man in Roanoke to own a car went to Robert J. Bolin. But it talks about the house faced Jefferson Street. So that's the front of the home. And those steps still are there in the front of the home. And it says the house faced Jefferson Street, the divider between east and west. A short flight of concrete steps on each of the large front lawn was connected by a long curving concrete walkway, the entire length of the lawn. Then it goes down to say it extended the width of the house and around the south side for about 25 feet. So they also had a 4-car garage. The front entrance to the house was directly in front of the staircase, and another entrance was possible through French doors on the south side. There was also a flight of steps leading off this entrance into the south side yard. On the north side, a long driveway curved from Jefferson Street near the corner of Patton Avenue. And now there's a name that's in the sidewalk on the side of the home directly across the street from the Gainsborough Library. There's a set of steps on the side of the property, and at the bottom of those steps, the father-in-law of Dr. Claytor put the name Dr. Claytor in the sidewalk. And so that name has been there for over 100 years. And just a tremendous home. The back door, most used by the family, was the off-level top of the hill overlooking Gainsborough Road. Now, they weren't done. After they only had 2 children at this time, eventually they would have 8. Their first child was born in 1915. Their last child was born in 1936. They had 4 sons, 4 daughters. 3 of their sons went into the medical field. After building their home, 20 years after that in the 1940s, Mrs. Claytor wanted her husband and her sons to work together. So what did she do? According to the family, she told her husband, you need to build a medical clinic. So he went to building a medical clinic. And this medical clinic was finished in the 1940s, I think around 1946, 1947. Unfortunately, Mrs. Claytor passed away before the opening ceremony of the medical clinic. And that is why it's entitled Claytor Memorial Clinic, in honor of their mother and their wife, Mrs. Roberta Woodfin Claytor. Just a tremendous family, a tremendous story. If you know someone with the last name Claytor, more than likely they're related to these individuals here. Dr. Claytor, as I said, was one of 13 children. He had 8 children. One of his children, the eldest, Frank Claytor, he had 8 children. So just a huge family, a tremendous family, an important family. Dr. Conrad Claytor, he's a retired podiatrist. He is the grandson of Dr. Claytor and Mrs. Claytor. Just a tremendous, tremendous story. A 23-room mansion in the 1920s, a service station in the 1920s, and then in the 1940s, a memorial clinic, all in the same area, all on one piece of land, owned by an African-American family. Unfortunately, all of these properties were completely destroyed by fire. So none of these properties, except one building of the medical clinic, stands today. The family still owns this piece of property. So it has been in the family for over 100 years as well. But the home no longer stands. The service station no longer stands. And the memorial clinic were actually 2 buildings, and now it is only 1. Dr. Isaac D. Burrow. As I said earlier, Dr. Burrow was such an important figure in the state of Virginia, even though he was refused surgery. The Richmond Planet took out a full-page ad when he built his home in 1905. And the ad reads, Dr. I.D. Burrow has erected one of the finest private dwellings owned by any colored citizen in Virginia. It is admirably located on a slight elevation in Roanoke, Virginia, in the neighborhood of his pharmacy. So this home sat on top of the hill, and his pharmacy sat at the bottom of the home. So where those steps are that I was telling you about earlier, across the street from the Gainsborough Library, to the right of those steps on top of the hill is where this home sat. And then there's a huge empty piece of land directly below that hill, and that is where his pharmacy sat. So a tremendous area, a tremendous story, all started and built by Dr. Burrow. Miss Lucy Addison is in this photo here. She stayed with the Burrow family for many years. Mrs. Burrow and Dr. Burrow are in this photo here. And this home was completely knocked down and destroyed during the time of urban renewal as well. And then the church that we're looking at right now is called First Baptist Church, Gainsborough. It's the original location of First Baptist Church, Gainsborough. It was on North Jefferson Street. This building, the small building here, that building still stands. It's now a TAP daycare. And as you can see in the background, you see Hotel Roanoke. And then at the bottom of this photo is where the Clater Mansion sat. So that the bottom of this photo is the Clater piece of land. This was started in the late 1800s by former slaves who used to attend a Sunday school by one of the first Highlands College presidents. They started First Baptist Church, Gainsborough. In 1925, a gentleman by the name of Howard Thurman was ordained at this church here. He was ordained at First Baptist Church in 1925. And of course, Howard Thurman, he would go on to impact the entire world. He was one of the, biggest influencers of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was actually the nephew of Reverend L.A. James, who was one of the pastors at First Baptist Church. Howard Thurman ordained here in 1925. Unfortunately, this church was completely damaged by fire as well in 1995. So that is why you probably do not recognize this building standing there today. But this building was on North Jefferson Street, directly across the street from where the Clater property was. And this building still stands today and is now a TAP daycare. Again, just a tremendous story. And Dr. Clater was a deacon at First Baptist Church. Dr. James Roberts, who was another founding member of Burrow Memorial Hospital, was a deacon at First Baptist Church as well. Just, again, a tremendous story. And now this church is located on Wells and Jefferson Street, First Baptist Church, Gainsborough. Dr. Pinkert, he was not a medical doctor by traditional sense. He did not attend school. He was given the name doctor by the community. He was a herbalist. He healed hundreds and hundreds of individuals all the way from Pennsylvania to Georgia. He was born in 1865 in Rocky Mount, Virginia. He passed away in 1934. But before that time, he started Acorn Banking Company right here in Roanoke, Virginia, an African-American bank on Salem Avenue. He built a housing development on 220 where the current Lowe's is. There used to be a black housing development called Pinkert Court. And Dr. John Pinkert created that housing development, exactly where the location of Lowe's is on 220. Just a tremendous individual. Again, he passed away in 1934. He had a gold-plated cane. He had a chauffeur. Again, he did not attend any type of formal education, but he was considered a doctor in the community, and he healed people from all the way from Pennsylvania all the way down to Georgia. One of the first Black attorneys, or the first Black attorney, A.J. Oliver here in Roanoke, was his longtime friend and lawyer, but just a tremendous story, tremendous history by the gentleman by the name of Dr. John H. Pinkert. And this building where his banking company was, that building still stands. That building actually still stands, but the housing development that he created for African Americans called Pinkert Court, unfortunately does not stand, but it is the exact location where Lowe's is on 220. Now, this is the part where all of the history and information just was completely wiped away and decimated. As I read earlier out of Root Shock, urban renewal was referred to by many individuals in the African-American community as Negro removal, because majority of the urban renewal projects throughout the country were in African-American communities. So this happened throughout the country, starting by the Housing Act of 1949. And in the 1950s is when it hit Roanoke, Virginia. The Housing Act of 1949 allowed cities to use the power of eminent domain to clear blighted neighborhoods for public use and to lure suburbanites and businesses back to the inner city. The Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. Now, the just compensation part is the part that gets a little tricky, because it determines, you do not necessarily determine what the just compensation is, especially in the 1940s and 50s without the ability of technology and social media. If you could not afford an attorney, it was kind of, you get what we give you and you move on. So in 1949, the Housing Act hits, and in Root Shock, as I read earlier, the gentleman by the name of Mr. Richard Chubb, longtime educator in Roanoke, and he was interviewed by Mary Bishop. I strongly suggest that you read an article by Mary Bishop, Street by Street, Block by Block. It was a 1995 Roanoke Times article, and that article was what really sparked the conversation around urban renewal. And that article is actually what brought Dr. Mindy Fullilove to Roanoke. And when she got here, she was referred to a gentleman by the name of Richard Chubb, and she says that Mr. Chubb was interviewed by her, and he says that she said, we passed a series of businesses sitting in such wide swaths of grass, they seemed dwarfed by nature, pointing in succession at Magic City Ford, the post office, and the Civic Center. Mr. Chubb said with bitter instance, there used to be houses here. Those are just buildings. Then he says, this is Henry Street. This used to be jumping. We had neon. And then he says, when they were sitting in his office building on Henry Street, he says, come over to the window. And she says, we stood shoulder to shoulder and pointed up to the empty street. And Mr. Chubb said, sometimes I just stand here and the tears come down thinking about what used to be. What used to be houses, not buildings, neon, not vacant lots, neighborhood, not emptiness. I wanted to see what he saw and to understand how it came to being in every city where I was studying the effects of urban renewal. I asked people, what was it like before urban renewal? And this is Mr. Richard Chubb here. He was the last principal at Harrison Elementary School in 1971 before it was closed. He retired from Roanoke City Public Schools as a principal at Hurt Park. He became a business owner on Henry Street and he still was impacting the story of Gainesboro at the age of 86 years old. It's a tremendous individual and a tremendous story. And so the Commonwealth Project, the Kimball Project, and then the Gainesboro Project are the three urban renewal projects that took place here in Roanoke, Virginia. The Commonwealth Project was the first in 1955, and that was the beginning of the construction of the Civic Center and the interstate. So that started in 1955. The Kimball Project came in 1964, and that was the start of the construction of the main post office, places like Magic City Ford, the gas company, even the area where McDonald's is, even the area of where the old cemetery used to be. And then in 1968, the Gainesboro Project, which is considered by many the longing lasting project of the three. Over time, there were 83.5 acres of land that were completely taken away. 1,600 homes, over 200 businesses, multiple churches and schools, just a tremendous community, tremendous neighborhood, completely turned around and shifted by what many people refer to as urban renewal, but the community referred to it as Negro removal. One of the parts of those projects was the finishing of the construction of the interstate to connect I-81 to 581. And so there's a cemetery on Orange Avenue called Old Lick Cemetery. You have the old sheets, a subway, I think it's an Econo Lodge. And then there's a gated small piece of land on Orange Avenue. And if you ever looked over to the right, there are tombstones there. Where those tombstones are the remains of a cemetery called Old Lick Cemetery. It began as St. John's Episcopal Cemetery because St. John's Episcopal Church originated in Gainesboro. Then it turned into First Baptist Church Cemetery, predominantly became an African-American cemetery. And in 1961, here rest 933 bodies moved in October of 1961 from the city-owned section of Old Lick Cemetery located at Orange Avenue, 2nd Street Northeast, Roanoke, Virginia, to provide for Interstate Highway 581 to connect with Interstate Highway 81 in compliance with Ordinance number 14568, dated September 18th, 1961. 933 bodies were taken from that cemetery and dumped in a mass grave to finish the completion of the interstate. This cemetery went all the way to where the school administration building is now. And it's an organization called the Friends of Old Lick, and they go over there twice a month and they help to clean out the cemetery, cut the grass, cut the weeds back, touch up on the tombstones, and they're attempting to collect the names and the stories of the individuals that are still there, but attempting to locate the names of the individuals that were taken away. And so this block is down 460 at a cemetery called Corner Springs Cemetery, directly down the street from Corner Springs Detention Center. And when you drive up, this block is the first block that you see explaining the cemetery of Old Lick. And then here is a list of just a small number of businesses that was in the Gainesboro area and Henry Street. If you see, majority of them say closed or demolished, but there's two that stand out. And those two were the Clater Apartments, the mansion that turned into the apartments, and then the Clato Esso station. And next to those built businesses, it says arson. Because in 1995, when the fires happened, the fire marshal during that time actually referred to it as arson. He said in the Roanoke Times article that he believed these fires were deliberately set. And so next to these businesses, you will see arson. But the only remaining business of Old Gainsborough, Old Henry Street is the Roanoke Tribune. The Roanoke Tribune was started in 1939 in the Claytor service station. They moved to Henry Street. And when Henry Street was being revitalized in the 1970s, they completely bulldozed the Roanoke Tribune. And so every piece of information of Black history in Southwest Virginia that the Tribune printed from 1939 up until about 1975 physically has been lost. Physically has been lost. Miss Claudia Whitworth, she is 94 years old. Don't tell her I told you that. But she still edits every single word of the Roanoke Tribune, even at the age of 94. Her father started the paper in 1939. And that's the only living and existing business of Old Gainsborough, Old Henry Street. But you can just see the amount of businesses that were in that location. You see pharmacy, Bill's Restaurant, shoe stores, pool rooms, tailoring, taxi, funeral homes. Everything was in Henry Street or in the area of Henry Street. And none of these businesses are there currently. And then one of the most tremendous stories I have heard since researching all of this information, if you were reading the news here lately or saw the news, the Berglund Center just unveiled a mural honoring people who grew up in the northeast section of Roanoke. And they also named a few of the rooms in the Berglund Center after three individuals, David Ramey Sr., Richard Chubb, and a lady by the name of Kathleen Ross. Kathleen Ross was born in 1924. Her father bought a home in Northeast in 1921. He bought this home for his family. She was born in 1924. When her parents passed away, she stayed in the home to raise her family. 1955, urban renewal comes. 1955, they are told that we're going to rebuild your homes. You go over here for a little while, and when you come back, your home will be rebuilt. Kathleen Ross didn't believe a word that they said. So she stayed in her home as the Civic Center was being built, as the interstate was being built, and she stayed in her home in the side parking lot of the Civic Center up until 1981. So just imagine, and there's a picture at the end of this that shows the Civic Center and then her home in the parking lot. But she was just a tremendous individual. Urban renewal hit that area in 1955. Eventually, by the 1960s, everyone had already moved out to housing developments such as Lincoln Terrace and Hurt Park, and they were forced out. Kathleen Ross stayed in her home until 1981. Folks like the Jackson Five would come to their home when they would come to the Civic Center to perform. Many individuals would park in her front yard as they were going to the show at the Civic Center. She was just a tremendous individual. And literally, she stayed in her home as they were building the Civic Center. As they were operating the Civic Center, she lived in her home. As they built the interstate, she stayed in her home. And she told Mayor Noel C. Taylor no. She told the sheriff deputies no. She told the police chief of that time no. She told all the local ministers and pastors no. And her son and her daughter said that she would always ask them, well, where do you live? And when they would tell her, she would reply back, your home is not being taken away. She would tell that to the mayor. She would tell that to the police chief. She would tell that to the pastors and the ministers. And again, she stayed in her home 30 years after urban renewal hit that area. Now, this is a young, well, she wasn't young then, but this is according to her family, she stood about yay high. And just imagine the entire city of Roanoke coming to you, telling you that you have to leave. And she just told them no. So she stayed in her home until 1981 before her children kind of made her leave because it just wasn't safe for her there anymore. She passed away about 20 years ago. She was in her 70s, but just a tremendous individual that impacted the city of Roanoke. And the mural that was painted by Bryce Cobbs, she's right in the middle of it with a beautiful white dress and beautiful white gown on. And she's right in the middle of this mural, Miss Kathleen Ross. And now there is a room at the Berglund Center named in her honor as well. And then this is Dr. Walter Clater, the dentist of the family. Of course, his father was Dr. John B. Clater. And this is what the Clater Memorial Clinic looks like today. And Dr. Walter Clater, who's 97 years old. The property was put under eminent domain in 1972. And the entire Clater block was put under eminent domain. And so something was supposed to happen with the property. It was either supposed to be knocked down or put to use, or the family was supposed to be given some type of compensation. That did not happen for the next 25 years. So eventually in the early 2000s, Dr. Walter Clater and the Clater family took the Roanoke Housing Authority to court. Dr. Walter Clater would become the first private citizen in the state of Virginia to win an eminent domain case against a government agency. You can look this up, Walter Clater, Roanoke Times, and all of the news articles about the case will come up. But he won that case against the Housing Authority. They received some compensation. They still own the property. They received some type of compensation, but there was a commission that was created to decide on how much or even if they received compensation. And Mr. Richard Chubb was on that commission. But again, Dr. Walter Clater became the first private citizen to win an eminent domain case against a private government agency. And one of the reasons he took them to court was he basically said, you know, you put my property on the eminent domain. We don't like that, but you didn't give us any type of compensation for it. You just kept it under eminent domain. So we weren't able to use it. We weren't able to rent it out. We weren't able to sell it or do anything. It just sat there for 25 years. And a fire actually happened here as well in the 1990s. And that is why many of you now know the Clater Clinic is just one building. But as I said earlier, it was actually two buildings. And the fire just completely decimated the other building. But again, Dr. Clater, the oldest living Clater family member, she lives in West Virginia. She's 101 years old, Roberta Clater. And then the eldest just recently passed away last year. She was 103. So, and he's 97. So I don't know what the trick is, but some type of Clater water or something. But this is what the Clater Memorial Clinic looks like today. And this is Dr. Walter Clater here. And then here's the picture I was telling you about. Is there like a pointer? But you see the Civic Center? And then to the left is the home of Mrs. Ross. And so there's a clearer picture online that you can see, but the Civic Center is here. At the bottom is Williamson Road. And then up at in the left corner is Mrs. Ross's home. And as I said, they literally built the Civic Center as she was still living in her home. And then, of course, this is the main post office. My great-grandmother, Robbie Boyd, was actually born in the area of the post office. Then this is Northeast Roanoke. And then this map was put in the 1995 article by Mary Bishop I was telling you about. And it talks about all of the urban renewal projects. It talks about the construction of the interstate. You all familiar with Coca-Cola Bottling Company? That used to be in a neighborhood as well. So it talks about the construction of Coca-Cola. But then the most devastating part of this map, if you look at all the red and pink markers, every red and pink marker is where a home sat. So a home sat there in 1955. This map was created in 1995. So everywhere that you see a red and pink marker, is where a home sat at one point. And this is in the 1995 Street by Street, Block by Block Roanoke Times article by Miss Mary Bishop. And then this is my favorite photo of Gainsborough, my favorite photo of Henry Street. If you see Hotel Roanoke is right over there. And then this is Jefferson Street right here. This is a 1924 photo, and the railroad had not been connected yet. At the top, you see the Claytor Mansion. And then directly below that, you see the Claytor Service Station. Across the street from the mansion, you see First Baptist Church. And then this used to be Norfolk and Western buildings. It's now an apartment complex, the Roanoke Higher Education Center building. And then this church right here in the middle is the original High Street Baptist Church. Reverend Mayor Noel C. Taylor actually preached at this church here. And then this is Henry Street. You see the Hotel Dumas, you see the Virginia Theater, and you see all of the buildings and businesses and homes that were there in 1924. And so that's Henry Street, Center Avenue, Jefferson Street, Hotel Roanoke, and then you can see the homes that were directly across the street from Hotel Roanoke as well. And it kind of gives you, so this picture here is in the same article. And this is a 1950 photo, and this is a 1995 photo, the same exact photo. It's the same exact photo. This is 1950, this is 1995. And you can see at the top on this photo here is the Civic Center. Then if you come directly across from it, at the top of this photo is a tank. And Northeast was referred to as Tank Town because there was two huge water tanks in the middle of Northeast. And those tanks are right at the top of this photo here. But you can kind of see the amount of trees and the homes that are all in that area at the top. And all of that was Northeast Roanoke. And then this is what downtown Roanoke looks like today. St. Andrew's Catholic Church, of course, Wells Fargo, Hotel Roanoke, the Higher Education Center, the Todman Museum, and then the interstate right there going downtown. Well, I'm all done with my presentation. Thank you.
Our covenant says that we commit to being a force for good in the world. That takes our time, our talents, and our finances. The ushers will collect the offering at this time.
Good morning. Well, let me check this Lifelines book real quick here. Sorry. Okay. I'm Robert Wallenborn, a member of the Caring Committee. And one of the things the Caring Committee does is we record the current joys, concerns, and milestones of the congregation as lifelines. Take my mask off. And if you would like to tell us about a joy, concern, milestone that you would like to be shared, you can call or email a member of the Caring Committee, or call or email the church office, or you can write it in this Lifelines book, which is on the altar on Sunday mornings and out in the alcove beside the name tags in the hallway during the week. And let us enter into a time of reverence together into this space of love and hope. We bring these joys and concerns today. Okay. So Beth Carruthers has good news about her great niece who is recuperating from heart problems. Her recovery is a success, and she was able to move to, I guess that's St. Petersburg. And Charlotte Seth, our former director of religious education, also had happy news this week. Her daughter, I guess that's Anjali, became engaged to marry her beau, Carl Saunders. And Jimbo and Mary Harshfield met 39 years ago today. Just a few other things. Kirk Ballin reports, many of you may know Richard Buckingham, who used to attend here and was often in the choir. Sadly, is now receiving hospice care for cancer and is resting at a friend's house. Hilda Getz, who had open heart surgery in late January, and reports that she is gradually improving and appreciates all the support. She is at home, and she has been dreaming of some gluten-free chocolate desserts. So if anyone in the congregation is moved, you can call Hildy and take her a gluten-free chocolate dessert, although try and make it heart healthy. And Heather Mason reported yesterday that she had to take Gary Mason to the emergency room at Lewis Gale because his AFib had come back. He had an ablation in November 2021. I guess that had stopped it. Originally, he was going to stay overnight last night, but was headed home about 9 p.m. last night with strict medicine and symptom monitoring instructions. Let's see. Right now, the only thing Heather and Gary need is good and healing thoughts. Gary would be glad to receive text messages. He is in good spirits and would like to keep it that way. You can see me after the service or at coffee hour, and I can give you Gary's cell number. And then also, Beth Griffin had a fall at home in the middle of the night. I think maybe it was Tuesday night last week. And had to go to the hospital. It was in the hospital maybe 2 or 3 days. She broke 2 ribs, and but is home now and will start physical and occupational therapy this coming week. Sure. Okay. Oh, all right. Okay. And now I share these words. May you be at peace. May your heart remain open. May you awaken to the light of your own true nature. May you be healed. May you be a source of healing for all beings. And if you would like to light a candle for something that is on your heart this morning, I invite you to come forward during the music meditation, and may the warm light of that flame bring you peace. And please use both sides of the altar.
I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you. I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you. I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you. I will be your standing stone. I will stand by you.
May our prayers be heard and our hearts be restored.
I want to thank everyone again for inviting me here this morning. And I wanted to close out with the book Root Shock as well. It's sort of a act and a challenge to all of us in the room today. In the book, Dr. Fully Love, on page 239, there's a passage that's called Time to Act. And she says, Pitram Sorkin reminds us that calamity is both disaster and opportunity. In the aftermath of a calamity, people will be generous in unexpected ways, and they will focus on the problem at hand to a remarkable extent. When the crisis passes, it is true, they will go back about their business, but for the moment, all eyes are focused on the matter at hand. This is a remarkable achievement, one that was repeated in many networks around my city. Though we pass through times of calamity, if we hang together, we can use the opportunity to imagine a better future. This is a great lesson to learn. And then she finishes, we are somewhere on the dwelling journey spiral. We have all been forced from home, but none of us have yet reached safety. We might choose to continue to proceed in blindness, but we might also recognize that we can use the journey to create the arrival of our dreams in the community of all of us. And she finishes by saying, let us listen to the bell. It tolls for us. It's time to go home.
I have one announcement this morning. As you leave out in the foyer, you can pick up one of these forms that's asking for your help in the areas of skill or interest or experience that you might want to share. Computer skills, communication, finances, graphics, helping others, which involves cooking or driving folks to service, maintenance or landscaping, technical expertise, working with children and teens, or other skills that you would like to share. So if you can help on an as-needed basis with any of those areas, please fill out one of these as you leave. And now may our hearts be moved by what we have heard today. And may that movement urge us forward to action. Amen.
Unity, oh, unity, 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 oh, unity, all that is to come. Many rhythms, many voices, in unity we are one. Oh, we are all connected to a world of harmony. Many voices, many rhythms, we're singing in unity. We are singing along to Roanoke, with the world is in our hands. We are singing for with justice. We are ready to take a stand. We have hopes and aspirations. We are none of us the same. In our messages, in our music, it is unity that we claim. Unity, unity, when I find my voice, I'm in harmony with unity, unity, unity. Oh, unity, unity, when I hear my notes of chorus ringing, unity, unity, unity. Oh, unity.